So about 14 years ago, I'm watching a film with my dad, The Last King of Scotland. I'm sure many of you have watched it as well. It won an Oscar that year. I remember thinking it was an amazing film when the credits rolled. James McAvoy's performance, Forest Whitaker's performance. I think Forest Whitaker won the Oscar for it. But my dad's response to it was more complicated. And as an African man who grew up around that time, I think for him all he could really see were caricatures. But to really understand that, let me synopsis the story for you. So, a young white man who is unexceptional in every single way, except from the fact that he's white and he's a man, graduates from university, decides that he wants to go traveling around the world, and he spins the globe. He puts his finger on the globe and it stops on Uganda. So off he goes, he flies to Uganda, and in what seems like the space of a very few weeks, he meets the president, he joins the government, he saves the president's life, he seduces the president's wife, he impregnates the president's wife, he takes the president's wife for a backstreet abortion, and then he saves all of Uganda from the evil dictator, while every single black man and woman in that film, except for Idi Amin, exists through the film without having any agency whatsoever. For those black people in that film, if this young, unexceptional white person doesn't turn up and save the day, they would have done nothing. The evil dictator would have survived. And that's a very successful synopsis of that story. It's accurate. And yet, you know, when you say it that way, it sounds ridiculous. But I don't think that you truly understand how ridiculous that synopsis is and that story is until you turn it on its head. So, imagine this story, if you will. A young black man from the University of Uganda. He's unexceptional in every single way, except from the fact that he's black and he's a man. This guy's not even a junior doctor, he's literally just graduated from university. He decides that he wants to go traveling, so he spins the globe, and his finger stops the globe and it lands in the United Kingdom. He flies to the United Kingdom, and in a space of a very few weeks, he seduces Princess Diana. He impregnates Princess Diana. He takes Princess Diana for a backstreet abortion. And then he joins the Conservative Party, and he saves all of England from a mad, maniacal dictator, while every single white person in the United Kingdom, retired military, politicians, police officers, MPs, everybody just sits around and says, thank God for this jolly good black man coming to save us, because if he didn't do anything, we would have been lost. Now, I genuinely believe that if that film got made, people would be offended. People would be insulted. And maybe they would be right to be offended. They wouldn't just say, oh, that's a terrible film. But somewhere along the line, we began to be very comfortable with having that story told about African people. But I would expand, you know, about black people, period, about working class people, about LGBT people, you know? I really feel like the stories that we tell really matter, you know? And, in the indictment that I just said, I would, cast myself in that as well, because my initial reaction to the film was a positive one. But I had to sort of sit back and think about how dangerous those stories are and how damaging they are to everybody, not just black people, but to everybody who engages with stories like that building a sort of a racial bias and a racial myth. And in terms of the question of our stories, the stories that we tell important, yes, I'm sure you could easily dismiss a story like that and go, oh, it's just entertainment. I remember some years after that, in 2009, there were those riots on the streets in London after the police had shot an unarmed black man. I believe his name was Mark Duggan. And, the kids in London, and actually in various parts of the United Kingdom, just like now, were on the streets demonstrating against what they believed. And I think what we've come to really understand are incredible structural injustices in this country. And for me, I watch Newsnight all the time. And I remember on the second night of the riots, I was watching Newsnight, and I think Emily Maitlis was hosting it. And the guest that they brought on that evening was David Starkey. And I remember, seeing that he was going to be on, and like everybody else in the country, I'm sure, I joined in that collective eye roll, thinking, oh, what is this idiot going to say now? I remember he started off that evening by talking in inflammatory way that he will, about how Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech is coming to fruition, and that essentially Enoch Powell was right, and that black people and white people can't live together. And okay, right, it's intellectual racism. We've got used to that. You know what you're going to get from somebody like that. But it's a pivot that he made after that that really, sort of staggered me, about how certain myths inside popular culture can, start to have an impact in everyday real life. I remember he pivoted to sort of trying to draw the analogy that there was something particularly black and something particularly violent about that blackness, about the riots that were going on. It wasn't a human thing anymore. It was aggressive capitalism, as you might say. And on an intellectual level, I think he was wrong. I don't think it was culture. I think that, we've raised a whole generation of children who, maybe don't necessarily value themselves by the content of their character, because, we've told them over and over again since the day they were born to value themselves by the things that they've got. You put on the TV and the heroes are the people who have 5 houses, they've got 6 cars. That's what makes you a good person in society, or you're a good person if you have the right trainers. You're a good person if you have the right phone. So, when these children decided to make a political statement for the first time in their life, did it surprise me that their decision was to attack, steal, burn down those same symbols that would tell them that they're not really a valid or good member of society? But, the thing that got me was, Starkey starts talking about how, if you listen to David Lammy, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he was white. And I'm sure I wasn't the only person in that moment, screaming at the television. David Lammy doesn't sound white, he sounds educated. He sounds articulate, he sounds intelligent. And, for me, that's possibly one of the most racist things I've ever seen. And it wasn't just that he said it, because obviously that's the kind of person he is, that pseudo academia where you take one fact that is kind of true and you use it to debase the established thinking, whilst ignoring 99 other facts that sort of contradict your point. And because he's a professor, he's got a title, people will listen to him. The thing that really shocked me, I guess, about that moment was watching Emily Maitlis's reaction. I've never met Emily Maitlis. I'm sure she's an extraordinary broadcaster, and I'm sure that 9 out of 10 times she gets it absolutely right. I really enjoy watching the way she presents the news. But this day, I think she really struggled to nail down and to riposte that he had said something that was extraordinarily racist. There's a pause inside that. I'm sure you can get a video where I'm like, push back. I'm screaming. Tell Starkey that David Lammy doesn't sound white. And it's racist because, look, the idea that there's a way that a black person should sound, and that way that a black person should sound is like somebody who is uneducated or has always been on the streets. I think like there's this popular idea that so it's like maybe all black people should sound like 50 Cent when he was at the beginning of his career, as opposed to 50 Cent now after he's had an opportunity to have education and to have experiences in this world that have elevated him. For me, it's moments like that, I guess, moments of real racism, moments where some people, lots of people, should know better. I mean, you think about it. London's burning, right? People's lives are going up in flames, and a lot of intelligent, well-meaning people, from, I'm sure, Emily Maitlis across to whoever the producer, I think it's Gibbs or something like that, was at the BBC, decided that in that moment, the most important thing was to bring somebody onto the news who was going to say something that was inflammatory, something that was insensitive, and something that I think is deeply damaging to the psyche of black people, of everybody in this country who has to engage with that kind of nonsense. And I'll end with this, you know. You think about that year. What those kids did was tough. I'm not sure I agree with burning down your own community. But you think about what happened either side of that event. You had two extraordinary crimes. You had the financial crisis and you had the MP's expensive scandal. Now, with the financial crisis, that has changed the way we still live today. The corruption and the crimes that were committed, nobody, I mean, maybe one or two people went to jail, but essentially everybody just got given a pass. Now, with the expensive scandal, those people were essentially told, even though they were essentially stealing, our MPs were stealing, what, 150,000, plus for all manner of silly things. Those people were just given a slap on the wrist. As long as you pay the money back, that's fine. But those children who are out on the streets fighting for justice, fighting against structural racism, for stealing trainers, our response was we need to put all of those children in jail, because if we don't put them in jail, it'll set a bad example and they'll continue to do this crime. Now, like for me, some of these kids, and I've worked with a lot of young people over the years, maybe they're not as articulate as me, and maybe they're not able to put things across the way I am right now. But that does not mean that they do not feel that injustice, and they do not feel the rage that I feel as much as I'm trying to get across to you now. They can see that there's a double standard in this world, and that they're getting the short end of the stick. So, in terms of the question, why does culture matter, and who owns the stories that we tell? Hopefully that gives you a sense of what I think about things, and about why I think the stories that we tell really matter, and why this movement right now, this Black Lives movement, why that really matters too. Thank you.